let's talk about crypto again and Bitcoin in specific. Last week I did analyze here on Cycles TV the Bitcoin US dollar chart, which was price-based. Today, let's think about Bitcoin driven by global liquidity. From that perspective, Bitcoin is no longer an asset just valued in terms of US dollar. Bitcoin should be valued across different currencies, which means we should look at a Bitcoin basket instead of just one simple Bitcoin currency. That's the topic for today. Welcome to Cycles TV.
From the mind of Lars von Tienen, the most advanced cycle analysis, hot off the press.
Bitcoin basket. Let's talk about why a Bitcoin basket instead of a single currency. So let's start right at the top here. So the standard way of analyzing Bitcoin or cryptocurrency is you use a single currency pair. So Bitcoin valued in US dollar, Bitcoin valued in euros, and whatever currency. But this only is one specific view which depends on the local currency and the local fluctuation of the monetary policy of that currency against the other currencies. So that would miss the full picture in terms of Bitcoin is a global asset. And if it is a global asset, we should find a way to measure the value from a global perspective and not just from the valuation of one single currency or country. So therefore, using a Bitcoin basket out of 15 currencies is much more useful in terms of a global perspective than just one currency. So, and we are thankful that Michael Howell, the expert in global liquidity, provides a so-called Global Liquidity Bitcoin basket. And not only does this basket consist of 15 currencies, he also uses a weighting mechanism, which is seen here, so that each currency is weighted based on the contribution of that currency or that country to global liquidity. And that's a very important aspect here. So we know that Bitcoin in specific is around 40% dependent on global liquidity factors. So that's one of the most influencing aspects. And if we know that Bitcoin is dependent on that global liquidity topic in a very high range, we know that global liquidity is, as the word states, a global topic and not just an US-based topics. So therefore, using the weights on each country's specific influence on global liquidity to weight also the Bitcoin currency pair in that basket will give us a much more global perspective on the value of Bitcoin related to the impact of global liquidity from that country. So therefore, Michael Howell is a friend of the FSC and has provided us with his latest data on the Global Liquidity Bitcoin basket, which we will use here. So last but not least, this means that we are able to view Bitcoin through a macro lens. And as the last point here, so this allows us to remove a noise which we would have by just analyzing one currency pair, right? So these are the 5 key facts why we are doing what we are doing. And now let's start to jump over to the chart. So by the way, you're watching Cycles TV. If you're new to the channel, my name is Lars von Tienen. We are live. So if you want, please provide your questions and comments in the chat section. And I'm just cross-checking so everything is running smooth. So let's now jump to the chart and let's do the analysis. By the way, before doing that, I mean, maybe you have followed the news also recently, so it's no surprise by what I just said. So here in that case, it's the news from October. So the S&P launches a new crypto index. The Digital Markets 50 will give diversified exposure. And if you just read a new index combining 15 cryptocurrencies, right? So that's what S&P will also start to prepare. So, I mean, we clearly see that there is a global demand to really view Bitcoin through a macro lens. So S&P will provide to start that data. By the way, that data is not available from S&P, but they just announced that they will launch such an index. And as said, I'm just happy that we can use the data which Cross-Border Capital, Michael Howell, is recently collecting based on this global liquidity data. So this is what we are now seeing here on that chart. This is not the Bitcoin price, so be aware of that. What we're seeing here is the Global Liquidity Bitcoin basket with the full history and trading history we have here. So this is a basket of 15 currencies valuing Bitcoin as a price index here. So you see it's not as volatile as the individual currency towards Bitcoin would be. So, okay, that's the fundamentals. That's the data set we are using. What we're seeing down below here at the chart, hope you can just follow here, is the spectrum. And just following that spectrum here, we can identify one main important cycle, which is here seen at the bottom, which is a 202-day cycle, directly seen in the Bitcoin basket index here. If you're familiar with all the work on Bitcoin, and if you have seen the previous week Cycles TV episode related to Bitcoin, you are aware of that the 200-day cycle plays an important role in the history of Bitcoin, important tops and bottoms, right? So going back to the screen, we can also identify that cycle within the Global Liquidity Bitcoin basket, which is even interesting because it gives a more broader view and not just one currency here. So that's why I want to bring this to your attention for today. And even more important on that cycle here is that it really picked the previous tops of Bitcoin, which are seen here, and now here on that screen. So if we zoom in, so it really nicely also picked the previous two tops. I mean, if this is a top, it needs to be seen moving forward in time, but from a longer term perspective, it really worked out to bring that shaped cycle into play again. So, and I want to highlight that we are currently sitting at another major top of this short-term cycle, right? So we always need to be aware that this is from a global perspective and global liquidity perspective, that daily cycle is a short-term cycle. We are monitoring here in the overall perspective on global liquidity. So please always set this cycle into the context of global liquidity overall, because Bitcoin is driven by 40% due to the impact of rise and falling global liquidity, which also has a cycle, which also has a longer term cycle. It would be another story to talk about the cycle in global liquidity. But if you are aware of where we are in global liquidity per se, and please just refer to Michael Howell and his work on that, you can see this as the overall macro context where you now need to judge Bitcoin on a shorter term period. And if we move to the shorter term period within that overall global liquidity long-term cycle, we can isolate that we have a 200-day cycle, and that 200-day cycle has recently topped at, I mean, it's quite exact to the point. So that's the that's the simple short story. So you know where we are just in that cycle related to the overall global liquidity cycle. Now let's do, we're here for cycle analysis, right? So we are the foundation for the study of cycles. So we need to talk a little bit more about that specific cycle. So we just don't trust just because there's a cycle coming up on the analyzer or the spectrum or whatever. You should never trust this, as I did here with this 5 minutes. You need to be aware of the historical ups and downs and the relation and the impact of that cycle. So let's dive a little bit deeper into that 200-day cycle on the Bitcoin basket, right? So that's what I want to highlight now next. So going into that chart, we can review, or we can go back all the time here, 2018. As you see here. So, and always keep in mind, if you are a follower of that channel, you know that the cycle does not give us any clue on the magnitude or the amplitude of the expected price move. We are mainly here for analyzing the possible window in time of a top and bottom. So that's the key point we are looking for. And if you want to analyze that on those screens, you need to connect the dots or just the highs and lows from that swing and see that here. So that's not a very pretty picture here. So therefore, I have for sure prepared that perspective to do this in a kind of zigzag view. And this is the zigzag chart here, a little bit zoomed in. Let me just zoom in a little bit here to show you that picture. So here we see the 200-day cycle, as I've just shown to you on the analyzer, which is shown here at this purple cycle. And in this golden brown zigzag line, I have now just connected the ups and downs of the Bitcoin basket price index at those points in time when the cycle either tops or bottoms. What we can observe, if you follow the ups and downs here of that cycle, there was only one single instance, one single leg of that cycle here in the period of 2022, where the cycle projected an upswing, but Bitcoin still continued downwards. So there was one leg of that cycle which failed. All other full cycle swings have been on time in terms of identifying important tops and bottoms in Bitcoin, right? And let's now count the iterations here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And let's go to the last one here to the right, which is then 10. So we have 10 completed iterations of that cycle, and one leg out of those 10 full iterations has failed. So, you can calculate this in percentage if you want, but this is a very high stability cycle in terms of timing. And keep in mind, this is timing the Bitcoin basket. So the individual volatility on a specific currency, like US dollar, euro, or whatever currency you're trading, could slightly be off for sure, because we are just building that weighted basket. But phasing out the volatility brought in by individual currencies, if we put this aside, if we have a way to pull this out of the calculation right now, which a basket is mainly doing, we have a real view on the real global valuation, which potentially sits at a short-term top. Okay, so I hope that's the message, that's the cycle analysis I wanted to bring to your attention, and especially to set this into context of the global liquidity story and in context of the previous Cycles TV I did here last week, Monday, where I reveal the Bitcoin US dollar related price-based cycles. So this episode just adds up to the analysis on Bitcoin via the Bitcoin basket. Hi Franz, hi Space Credits. Can you give us your cycles forecast for low, potentially in September 2026? Yeah, let's have a look at at least what the cycles speak, Space Credits. So going back to the analysis of that chart, let me sort out the screen. Let's just move back here. Let's bring the analysis screen in. So that's the timing, that's the current timing here we see on the chart. So the basket is from that cycle, the short-term cycle of the Bitcoin basket currently projects the next bottom to arrive somewhere March 2026. So that's the current timing of that 200-day cycle, just looking into the future. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for today. So a short one, but even a very focused one. So I just wanted to give you an update on that. And maybe just to end the session, keep in mind, Bitcoin with a single currency does not give you the full picture in terms of Bitcoin is today a global asset. Yeah, so you should see it more in a global valuation, where a Bitcoin basket offers you a more broader view on the valuation. That's why S&P and the other main companies will also come up with this kind of index. I favor the version Michael Howell puts out with the GLI BB because he uses weights based on the contribution to global liquidity from each area, which is important as global liquidity has a huge impact driving Bitcoin. So with that way, we can view Bitcoin through a macro lens, and our macro lens, right, are cycles, right? So I think which gives a new perspective on a global valuation on Bitcoin. I mean, this is quite new for us all. Yeah, looking at a basket, Bitcoin as global asset, applying cycle analysis. So we don't have that hundreds of years of history we have it in the normal US stock markets, but that's what we're doing here. So let's observe Bitcoin, let's observe crypto, let's continue to monitor cycles, and that's what I will continue to do here on that channel. Please join, like, subscribe, leave a comment. See you next week.